Today we're going to create this awesome doorknob. This is a doorknob that came from reference photos I took out of my bathroom. Stay tuned. All right, first thing we want to do is tackle the reference photo. So first thing I'll do is I'll load 3 photos that I took myself with my iPhone of the doorknob. One's from the front view, one's from the top view, one's from the side view. So now I'm going in here and I'm going to add a reference photo. First one I'm going to choose is the front view, because as you guys know by now from watching my videos, I always like to work in ortho front view. So I keep my perspective as terms of where I am in the coordinate system. So I'm scaling it down. I'm not actually modeling this to scale. It's easier to do after we build it, but I'm going to rename it, give it a name so I know what it is, put it in a reference collection. And eventually I'll start changing the opacity and that sort of thing. But the first thing I want to do is add in the second one. So I'm going to go to the top view, and now I'm going to enter in the top photo that I took of the doorknob. Do the same thing, scale it down. And one thing you'll notice I start doing after I rotate it into place is I'm trying to scale this to match the first one that I brought in. So in other words, I'm trying to scale the top view of the doorknob relatively the same size as the front view. This is going to give us like a quasi 3D view of this doorknob and help us model it properly from every perspective. So right now I'm lowering the opacity so I can still see it, but it's not obscuring my view of the geometry, which is why we would do that. And I'm using that x-axis as a little bit of a guide. And as I can see, it's a little off, so I'm going to rotate it to get it as straight as possible because my camera lens is adding a little bit of distortion. And they don't have to be the exact same value in terms of opacity, just as long as you can see it. And what you'll see I'm doing is I'm taking the diameter of the knob and I'm going to try to take the top view and get it almost to the size of the diameter of the front view. If we were using a blueprint or a 2D illustration or a schematic, we could have gotten something a lot more accurate. But in many times you'll be working from photos like this, and this is for the most part good enough. All right, we're going to go in and add in the side view. We're going to literally do the same thing. We're going to scale it down. We're going to try to get the proportions about the same as the top and the front. And then once all done, we're going to rename it, throw it in the reference collection. And then we're going to change our opacity and set it up for modeling. And you'll see on the video that I kind of point out in certain places where I'm actually trying to draw your attention to the fact that I'm trying to scale it, the knob up the same size on pretty much every perspective here. Oh, another thing I'm doing is I'm using that x-axis to kind of be like a retaining line, if you will, for the front of the knob. So that's why you saw me move it back on the y-axis. So right here, so I'm looking at the front, and I'm just trying to draw an invisible line from the top of that front view's knob to the side one. This is just going to help our model look a lot better. Like I said, it doesn't have to be exact, but doing this little extra work kind of helps. If you want to get really detailed with this and get actual measurements, I would suggest using calipers, which I do use calipers for some work. This is all for free for you guys here on YouTube. However, if I was doing this for a client, I would be getting measurements from the client for the knob, say like if the knob was a product. However, if I did not have measurements, I would have to get a sample of the knob and measure it myself. And typically the tool I use to do that are calipers. I have digital calipers and regular calipers. All right, I am going in here and I turned on the filter that allows you to basically lock the collection into place so you don't have mistaken or accidental clicks and moves and shifts of the images here. So now we're ready to start modeling. So I want to start from the top view because I think this is, for me, how I want to start tackling this. So I'm going to bring in a circle with 16 vertices. I'm not going to fill it with anything because we're going to start from the back of the knob, the part that touches the door, and we're going to sculpt it out to the front. So I rotated it on X by 90 degrees, and now I'm sizing it down to roughly the size of the base that you see in the reference photo that's touching the door. And now I'm going to scale it up and kind of size it up to that. And then from there, we're going to start extruding it. And you'll see a common theme in a lot of these modeling videos that I post. It's a lot of extrusions and a lot of use of circles or cubes or planes or, you know, whatever that basic shape is that gets you started, right? So now we're going to scale this down where you see that piece taper. It's actually the piece that hides the screws that screw into the door that holds it in place. And notice I'm not going to let it stay this tall because I'm mentally taking into account the perspective or the distortion that is produced by the lens on my phone. So I'm going to keep extruding and scaling. I'm just going to extrude and scale down just a little bit here, and then I'm going to pull it back, extrude back into the geometry here to make it look as if it's set inside of that shape. Then I'm going to extrude and scale again, and then I'm going to extrude back out on the y-axis to actually start bringing the part of the handle that you actually turn with your hand. You see, I'm just using this reference as just a little guide. It's a fairly easy model to make, but the thinking through it, problem solving through it is what I'm trying to convey to everybody. Okay, we're almost done with the basic shape of this thing. So I want you guys to pay close attention to how I handle this front here and the perspective, or I should say lens distortion that the camera is producing. I'm just visually trying to figure out like how far this front piece of this knob should come. So that's why I'm looking at it so much before I do anything else. I'm just trying to determine, does this make sense? And you'll see I'll go back to the reference photo, because I'm still using that a little bit as a guide. Now I'm pretty good that I'm okay with that. That's good. So now I'm going to come in here and select that edge loop and kind of finish that front end there where you see that inner circle where the lock is. We're gonna sculpt that in now. And granted, it's not exactly centered, but I'd rather for my geometry to be centered than the reference photo. That's why I didn't shift it. So I'm kind of coming here at an angle so I can get my extrusion right, because what I want to do is do the same trick where we extrude and scale, and then I extrude it back into the geometry on the y-axis. Then I extrude and scale just a little bit there, and then I extrude it back out on the y-axis and basically make the lock look like a separate piece that's inset inside the knob. And then you'll see how we handle the lock, the hole for the lock here in a second. We're probably 90% done with the modeling here. Just that quick. All right, now what we want to do is we want to figure out how we want to model in that lock there. Now, this is not a lock that uses a key. This is a lock that use a paper clip or something just to turn that little piece there, and it allows the doorknob to turn. Like I said, it's an indoor knob. It's not one that requires an actual key. So I'm going to go to face selection mode. I want to select these faces here in the middle of this grid field, and I want to inset them, which gives me kind of a reference point to start manipulating geometry here. And I'm getting it roughly to the size, not exactly, because I can change the vertices around once we get the rough size taken care of. Okay, so I want to select the 3 verts at the top, and I want to scale them on the z-axis, set it to 0. That straightens them up on z-axis. I'll do that a few times. Okay, and now I'm going to do the same thing to the bottom. And now once I've done that, I'm going to do it to each side. And but instead of the z-axis, I'm going to use the x-axis. And think about this like with the scale on an axis. Think about it in terms of like if I were to hit G and G to basically slide the vertices across an axis, like what axis would it be sliding across? And that's a good way that I always remembered on like how to know what axis to pick when I'm scaling. Right? So then I'm just sizing this down on X to roughly make the width of that hole. And I think we got the top pretty good. And then I'm going to have that whole face selected, and I'm going to extrude it inward. Don't need to go too far back. And then I'm going to go to edge select mode, and I want to select the edges that basically cover that whole extrusion there. I want to grab those little corner edges, grab all the ones on the inside, grab the ones at those little angle areas. And what I'm essentially going to do is I'm going to crease them. Just make sure those set to 1. So when we run sub D on this, we don't get any weirdness. Okay, I want to hide my reference. Take a look at it. And one thing I don't love, but I think we're going to be okay, is how close that geometry is for the top of the lock to the round part of the lock. Gotta be real careful, because if you get things too close, you either get tessellation issues, which causes like the geometry to look weird, or you'll get overlapping geometries, which causes the geometry to look like it's torn. But in this case, it's not a problem. Okay, I'm just kind of coming in now, just tightening up, making some bevels around these edges, so that when we run sub D on it, I want this stuff to look nice and clean. And if you notice, I'm using 1 as a value there because I want to keep a sharp edge. When I want it to have a rounded edge on the bevel, so like a nice rounded bevel shape, then I use 0.5 or some other variation between from 0 to 1, and that's that percentage of the roundness. You can look at it like that. That's the percentage of the roundness that it's going to do. All right, so what I'm doing now is selecting all these faces in here. Now, granted, I could have selected one face and then hit Control or Command plus on the numpad to select everything. That would have been easier, but I'm doing this on purpose. I just want to show you guys and be very particular that you get everything in here, because you're going to see what we're going to do here in a minute. If you look at like the actual knob or some of the other reference photos I took that I didn't use the model from, this front face here isn't flat. It's kind of caved in a little bit. I think it's is it concave, convex. I can't remember which is which, but it's the one that kind of curves inward. I think that's concave. So I'm going to do proportional editing here, and I'm grabbing the G, and I'm just taking me a while to scale my cursor down, as you can see. So now we're bringing it in. It looks good. It looks about like the knob. And I'm doing some more bevels. I don't want this one to be sharp, so I'm using 0.5. Kind of looking at this here. I try to bevel this one, but I noticed there's some weird artifact, and it shouldn't be one there. So let's check the normals. And sure enough, that's part of the problem. So I'm going to go back here to edit mode. I'm going to hit Shift in, recalculate the normals. Okay, so now everything is blue, so we're good. So now I'll turn that off. And let's just make an edge loop here on the front. And I want to bevel it. And you're going to see when we run sub D on, it's going to make it nice and pretty, a nice little edge there. So we're pretty much done modeling. The only thing we're going to do from here in terms of the model is we're just going to add bevels and get everything ready for sub D. There's certain areas where I actually want there to be a hard edge. So you'll see in the bevel menu that pops up, once I bevel, I'll set it back to 1 under that shape. But in places where I don't want there to be a hard edge, I explicitly change it. Okay. Behind the reference. Now I'm just kind of looking at this and looking at geometry. So now I want to tackle geometry next, like making sure we have enough loops and that sort of thing. But before I do that, I want to add a solidify modifier, just give this thing some thickness. And this is non-destructive, so if I want it thicker later, I can change it. But for now, I think we're good here. This looks about like the real thing. I'm just kind of looking it over. So now let's come in here and let's add some more edge loops just to help the geo a little bit. Don't need a whole lot. This is not a super high dense model anyway. And we're going to let sub D do all the heavy lifting. Okay. And since we use solidify, it's going to copy over my edge loops to the other side as well. So that's why I didn't need to put it on the back. So now I added a level 2 subdivision modifier. This looks pretty good. But I see one area where I probably should add an edge loop in the front. So let's do this real quick. Just one loop right there. Bam, there we're good. And those loops are just helping to control how sub D works. We're saying sub D, you can smooth everything except for where these little places are where we have these loops, because these are kind of controlling the shape a little bit. These are kind of giving you guardrails, if you will. So now let's do some materials. This is going to be real simple. We're pretty much done modeling. So what I want to do now is I want to add in an HDRI. I know in some of my previous videos I just had it already loaded, but I'm just showing you the process here. I go for these files I have on my machine that are HDRI files, and they basically mimic a lighting of an environment. Gives you more realistic lighting and using lamps. And now I'm going to come in here. I select my doorknob. I go into the materials panel, and I'm creating a new shader. And essentially, I just want to create like your typical bronze or pewter looking metal doorknob. I'm not even going to add any texture to it. I mean, there's kind of no point. And before we're done, you won't see the noisy background. I'm just using the lighting from it to light my model. And we are in cycles, by the way. Okay, so I'm going to drag up my timeline. I'm going to change it to the shader option. I'm going to world, which is the HDRI. I'm going to hit Command T or Control T, which is Node Wrangler. It's a shortcut for Node Wrangler to add a mapping node and a texture coordinate node, and that it basically allows me to rotate the HDRI around. In this case, I'm rotating it on the Z-axis. I'm spinning it around the model to change where the majority of the lighting is coming from. I'm just trying some good lighting I like. Then I'm going to go back timeline and put it back. And the last thing we need to do is we need to go in our render settings, and I go into film and hit transparent, and everything that's not an object or a model in the scene, it will make it transparent, so it has that noisy HDRI. And now we are done. Congratulations, guys, you've modeled a doorknob. You're awesome.